The gentle hum of medical equipment filled room 412 of Oakwood Veterans Hospital, where retired Marine Sergeant James Cooper lay peacefully asleep, unaware of the extraordinary events about to unfold. His weathered hands, which once gripped rifles in distant battlefields, now rested quietly atop stark white hospital sheets, an IV line trailing from his arm. The doctors had given him days, maybe hours, but they had no idea about the miracle that was already in motion, set into action by a young nurse who couldn't accept that a hero's final wish would go unanswered. Ava Mitchell hurried through the bustling halls of the VA hospital, her sneakers squeaking against the freshly polished floors. 3 years into her nursing career, she'd developed the efficient stride of a seasoned healthcare professional, but today was different. Today, she moved with an urgency born not of medical necessity, but of human compassion. Her brown ponytail swung back and forth as she juggled her morning coffee, patient charts, and the small tablet that contained the morning's rounds information. The tablet screen displayed James Cooper's file, 68 years old, decorated Marine veteran, terminal cancer patient. But it was the notes from last night's shift that had caught her attention and wouldn't let go. Patient expressed desire to see his service dog Max one last time. Request denied due to hospital policy. The words seemed to mock her from the screen, their clinical detachment at odds with the deep emotion she'd witnessed in James's eyes when he'd made the request. Ava had been there when James first arrived at the hospital 2 weeks ago. Despite his declining health, he'd maintained the straight-backed posture and dignified bearing of a Marine. The only time she'd seen that composure crack was when he spoke about Max, the Belgian Malinois who had served alongside him in Afghanistan and later became his faithful companion through years of dealing with PTSD. Max now lived with James's a daughter in Seattle, over 2,000 miles away. Policy is policy, Dr. Richards had said during morning rounds, his voice carrying the finality of someone used to making difficult decisions. We can't have animals in the ICU. The risk of infection is too high, and we have other patients to consider. The other nurses had nodded in agreement, already moving on to the next patient, the next task, the next problem to solve. But Ava couldn't let it go. She'd seen too many veterans spend their final moments surrounded by beeping machines instead of the comfort they deserved. The morning sunlight streamed through the hospital windows, creating patterns on the floor that Ava barely noticed as she made her way to the nurse's station. Her mind was already racing, considering possibilities, regulations, and consequences. She'd been raised to follow rules, to color within the lines, to accept that sometimes life wasn't fair, but something about James's situation struck a deeper chord. "Morning, Ava," called out Nancy, the charge nurse, her voice carrying the cheerful efficiency of someone who'd already been on duty for hours. "Mr. Cooper's vitals are stable, but his O2 sats dropped a bit overnight. Dr. Richards wants—" "Nancy," Ava interrupted, setting down her coffee and leaning in close. "Have you ever broken a rule because you knew it was the right thing to do?" Nancy's expression shifted, years of nursing experience evident in the careful way she studied Ava's face. "This about the dog?" she asked quietly, though she already knew the answer. She'd been at the hospital longer than most of the doctors, had seen countless policies come and go, had witnessed both the necessity of rules and the occasional cruelty of their rigid application. Ava nodded, her fingers nervously playing with the corner of a patient chart. "His daughter Claire called this morning. Max isn't doing well either. He stopped eating like he knows something's wrong. They say animals can sense these things." She paused, gathering her courage. "I have a plan, but I need help, and it might get us both in trouble." Nancy glanced around the quiet morning hallway, then pulled Ava into the small break room nearby. The space smelled of coffee and hand sanitizer, the familiar sense of hospital life. "Tell me what you're thinking," she said, closing the door. behind them. But remember, we have responsibilities to all our patients, not just one. Ava took a deep breath, her heart racing with the enormity of what she was about to propose. She'd spent all night thinking about it, weighing options, considering angles. Claire's already on a flight with Max. I called her last night after my shift. They land at noon. She saw Nancy's eyes widen but pressed on. I have a friend who works at the animal therapy center downtown. If we could just get approval for a temporary therapy dog visit. Nancy's expression darkened. Ava, you can't falsify medical documents. That's not bending rules. That's breaking laws. But Ava wasn't finished. She pulled out her tablet, fingers flying across the screen. Look at these studies. Documented. Benefits of animal therapy in terminal patients, reduced anxiety, improved quality of life. We're not breaking laws. We're advocating for our patients' well-being. James Cooper served 3 tours in Afghanistan. He saved lives. He deserves this. One thing. The morning sun had climbed higher, casting long shadows through the break-room blinds. Somewhere down the hall, a call light beeped insistently. Nancy remained silent, her expression unreadable as she processed Ava's words. Finally, she spoke, her voice carrying the weight of decades of experience. You really want to risk your license for this? Ava stood straighter, channeling some of the determination she'd seen in James's bearing. I want to help a dying man say goodbye to his best. Friend, everything else is just details. What Ava didn't know, what neither of them could have guessed, was that their conversation was about to set in motion a chain of events that would touch not just James and Max, but everyone in the hospital. Sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest decisions, and the morning light streaming through those hospital windows was about to witness something extraordinary. Nancy's hesitation filled the break room like a physical presence, stretching seconds into what felt like hours. The veteran charge nurse's weathered face showed the internal struggle between decades of following protocol and the undeniable pull of compassion. Outside, the hospital was coming to life, the shuffle of changing shifts, the squeak of cart, wheels, the distant chime of elevator doors. But in this small room, time seemed suspended between possibility and prudence. Tell me more about his daughter, Nancy finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. She sank into one of the worn, break-room chairs, her coffee forgotten on the counter beside her. The morning light caught the silver threads in her hair, reminding Ava that Nancy had seen more than her share of both miracles and heartbreaks within these walls. Ava pulled up Claire Cooper's contact information on her tablet. She's a high school teacher in Seattle, single mum, 2 kids. She took Max in 6 months ago when James first got sick. The words tumbled out quickly, as if Ava feared losing Nancy's attention. She said Max has been different since James left, barely eating, spending hours by the front door. They've had this connection since Afghanistan. Her voice trailed off as the break-room door opened. Dr. Richards stepped in, his presence immediately filling the small space with an air of authority. Tall and distinguished, with precisely combed grey hair and wire-rimmed glasses, he was known throughout the hospital for his strict adherence to protocol. Ava felt her heart skip a beat, wondering how much he'd heard. Ladies, he nodded, making his way to the coffee maker. I trust you're discussing Mr. Cooper's declining condition. His tone was professional, but there was an edge to it that suggested he knew exactly what they'd been talking about. I've updated his charts to reflect the latest oxygen requirements. Ava watched as he methodically prepared his coffee. 2 sugars, no cream, same as every morning. The routine nature of his actions seemed at odds with the weight of what was happening just a few floors above, where a decorated Marine was spending his final hours without the comfort he most desperately wanted. Dr. Richards, Ava started, gathering her courage, about Mr. Cooper's request. "Nurse Mitchell," he interrupted, not unkindly but firmly. "We've been over this. Hospital policy exists for a reason. We can't make exceptions based on emotional appeals." He stirred his coffee with practiced precision, the spoon clinking against the ceramic in a steady rhythm. "I understand it's difficult, but maintaining proper medical protocols is non-negotiable." The words hung in the air, each one feeling like another barrier between James and his final wish. Ava felt something shift inside her, a quiet determination replacing her earlier uncertainty. She thought about James's room, filled with medals and photographs, one in particular catching her eye yesterday. A younger James in combat gear, Max alert and proud beside him, both of them dusty from Afghan winds but standing tall. "With all due respect, sir," Ava heard herself saying, her voice steadier than she expected. "I've been researching animal therapy programs in terminal care. The medical benefits are well documented." She reached for her tablet, but Dr. Richards held up a hand. "I'm familiar with the research, Nurse Mitchell. I'm also familiar with the specific challenges of maintaining sterile environments in ICU settings." He took a sip of his coffee, his expressions softening slightly. "Your compassion is admirable, but we have to consider the bigger picture." Nancy, who had been quietly observing, suddenly spoke up. "James Cooper received the Silver Star," she said, her voice carrying the weight of someone who understood sacrifice. "He pulled 3 men to safety under heavy fire, even after being wounded himself." She stood slowly, smoothing her scrubs with practiced hands. "Sometimes the bigger picture is about more than medical protocols." Dr. Richards paused, his coffee cup halfway to his lips. For a moment, something flickered across his face. Recognition, perhaps, or memory. Ava remembered hearing that his own father had been a veteran, though he rarely spoke about it. The morning sun had climbed higher, casting long rectangles of light across the break-room floor. Through the window, Ava could see the hospital's flag at half-mast. Another veteran had passed away in the night, she realized. The sight strengthened her resolve. "His temperature is stable, his viral panels are clear, and we could take full precautions," she pressed on, seeing the smallest crack in Dr. Richards' professional armor. "Max is up to date on all vaccinations. Claire sent me the records. We could use the private family room on the East Wing, away from other patients." Dr. Richards set his coffee down, his movements deliberate. "You've clearly given this a lot of thought, Nurse Mitchell." His tone was different now, more measured. "But you should know that going around proper channels could have serious consequences for your career." Ava straightened her spine, channeling some of the courage she'd seen in James's old photographs. "Some things are worth the risk, sir." She met his gaze steadily. "Sometimes doing the right thing means being willing to accept those consequences." The room fell silent again, broken only by the distant sounds of hospital routine. Call buttons, announcements, the eternal rhythm of a place where life and death danced their daily dance. Through the walls, they could hear the muffled sounds of morning rounds beginning, reminding them that time was flowing forward, carrying James Cooper closer to his final moments. Dr. Richards looked out the window, his expression unreadable. "My father died in a VA hospital," he said suddenly, surprising them both. "He asked to see his old service photo one last time, but it was locked in hospital storage. Policy said we couldn't retrieve personal items after certain hours." He turned back to them, his professional mask slipping just slightly. "I've always regretted following that policy. The private family room on the East Wing was rarely used, tucked away at the end of a quiet corridor where the morning bustle of the hospital felt distant and muted." Ava stood in the doorway, mentally transforming the space. She'd already moved the medical equipment against the walls, brought in comfortable chairs, and found a thick blanket that didn't feel like standard hospital issue. Through the large windows, oak trees swayed gently in the morning breeze. Their leaves casting shifting shadows across the floor. Her phone buzzed, a text from Claire, landing in 30 minutes. Max is anxious but okay. Thank you for everything. Attached was a photo of the Belgian Malinois sitting alert in what appeared to be an airport terminal, his intelligent eyes focused on something off-camera. Despite his age, Max still carried himself with the bearing of a service dog, though Ava could see the grey around his muzzle and the slight stiffness in his posture that mirrored his owner's decline. Nurse Mitchell. Dr. Richards's voice from the doorway made her jump. He stood there in his white coat, clipboard in hand, looking every inch the authority figure she'd always known him to be. But something was different now. A subtle shift in his stance, a softening around his eyes. I've been reviewing Mr. Cooper's latest labs. Ava held her breath, waiting. After their conversation in the break room, Dr. Richards had disappeared into his office without another word. She'd spent the last hour alternating between preparing the family room and checking on James, whose condition remained stable but fragile. His oxygen levels are holding, Dr. Richards continued, stepping into the room, and I've been speaking with Dr. Martinez about the documented benefits of animal therapy in terminal patients. He paused, looking around the room with clinical assessment. You've made some changes in here. Yes, sir, Ava replied, trying to keep her voice steady. I thought, if you approved, it would be more comfortable for everyone. She watched as he walked to the window, his reflection serious in the glass. You know, he said, still looking outside, when my father was in the hospital, he used to talk about his service dog from Vietnam. Rex, a German shepherd, said that dog knew what he was thinking before he thought it. He turned back to Ava, his expression thoughtful. I never really understood that connection until I started working with veterans. The morning light caught his wedding ring as he gestured toward the room. You've created a good space here. Private, controlled environment, easy to maintain, sterile conditions. His clinical words seemed at odds with the emotion Ava sensed beneath them. If, and I stress if, we were to allow a brief therapy dog visit, this would be an appropriate setting. Ava's heart leaped, but she kept her professional composure. Yes, sir, we could maintain all necessary protocols. Claire, Ms. Cooper, has all of Max's medical records, and I've already prepared sanitization procedures. Nurse Mitchell, Dr. Richards interrupted, holding up a hand. I need you to understand something. What you're proposing isn't just bending rules. It's asking me to completely circumvent established hospital policy. If anything went wrong, the liability— I understand, sir, Ava said quietly, and I'm willing to accept full responsibility. Dr. Richards studied her for a long moment. Down the hall, they could hear the usual sounds of hospital life, nurses chatting, equipment being moved, the distant ding of elevator doors. But in this room, time seemed to stand still as authority weighed against compassion. Mr. Cooper's condition, Dr. Richards finally said, his voice taking on the formal tone he used for medical records, suggests he would benefit from specialized therapy intervention. Given his unique circumstances and military service history, I'm authorizing a controlled therapeutic interaction. He met Ava's eyes directly. I trust you understand the importance of maintaining absolute discretion and following all sanitation protocols. Ava felt tears prick at her eyes, but maintained her professional demeanor. Yes, sir, absolutely. 1 hour, he added, moving toward the door. That's all I can justify medically. And Ava. He paused in the doorway, his use of her first name surprising them both. Make it count. As his footsteps faded down the hall, Ava let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Her phone buzzed again, another text from Claire. Just landed. Max knew something was different the moment we got off the plane. He's pulling toward the exit, like he knows where he's going. Ava looked around the room one last time, making sure everything was perfect. The morning sun had reached its full Strength now, filling the space with warm light that seemed to promise something extraordinary. Sometimes, she realized, the biggest acts of courage weren't about running into burning buildings or charging into battle. Sometimes they were about standing up for what was right, even when the rules said otherwise. The elevator doors opened on the fourth floor, and Ava's heart nearly stopped. Claire Cooper stood there with Max, and even if Ava hadn't seen photos, she would have known this was James's dog. The Belgian Malinois carried himself with the same dignified bearing as his owner, his alert eyes scanning the hospital corridor. With military precision, despite his grey muzzle and slightly stiff gait, there was no mistaking the training and intelligence in his stance. "Claire," Ava stepped forward, keeping her voice low and professional. "I'm Ava Mitchell. We spoke on the phone." She watched as Max's ears perked forward at the sound of voices, his nose working the air with focused intensity. Claire nodded, her exhaustion evident in the shadows under her eyes. She looked younger than Ava had expected, dressed in travel-worn jeans and a wrinkled sweater that spoke of a hasty cross-country flight. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for making this happen." Max stood perfectly at heel, but Ava could see the tension in his body, the way his nose kept lifting to catch scents from down the corridor. She wondered if he could somehow sense James's presence, even from this distance. The thought made her throat tight. "We have everything prepared," Ava said, gesturing toward the family room. "Dr. Richards approved 1 hour. She glanced at her watch, conscious of every precious minute. "Your father's resting comfortably, and his vitals are stable." As they walked down the hallway, Ava noticed how other hospital staff paused in their duties, watching the unusual sight of a clearly military-trained dog moving through their midst. Max ignored them all, his focus absolute, his leash loose in Claire's hand as he maintained perfect position beside her. Nancy appeared from around a corner, her eyes widening at the sight of Max. "Everything's ready," she said quietly, falling into step with them. "James is awake and—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "He seems stronger somehow, like he knows." They reached the family room, where Dr. Richards stood waiting. His usual commanding presence seemed subdued as he nodded to Claire. "Miss Cooper," he said formally, "we've reviewed the situation and established protocols for this visit. 1 hour as discussed." His eyes fell on Max, and something shifted in his expression. Beautiful animal. Max had gone completely still, his attention fixed on the door to James's room across the hall. A small whine escaped him, so soft it was barely audible, but Ava saw Claire's hand tighten on the leash. The dog's entire body seemed to vibrate with recognition and restraint. "He knows," Claire whispered, tears starting to roll down her cheeks. "He's known since we got into the taxi. I don't know how, but he knows Dad's here." Dr. Richards cleared his throat, his professional mask slipping slightly. "We'll need to maintain sterile protocols," he said, but his voice lacked its usual authority. "Nurse Mitchell has prepared everything according to procedure." Ava stepped forward with the sanitizing wipes she'd gathered, carefully cleaning Max's paws and fur. The dog submitted to the procedure with military patience, though his attention never wavered from James's door. His nose worked constantly, taking in information that only he could process. "Dad's been talking about him non-stop," Claire said softly, watching as Ava worked. "Even when he's confused about other things, he remembers Max. Keeps asking if he's being taken care of, if he still remembers his training." Nancy appeared with a wheelchair. "We thought it might be easier," she explained, "in case James wants to sit up with Max." The preparation felt both rushed and eternal, each moment precious, yet weighted with protocol and procedure. Ava could feel Dr. Richards watching, his presence both supervisory and supportive. Finally, everything was ready. "Okay," Ava said, taking a deep breath. "Claire, why don't you go in first? Let your father know Max is here." We'll bring him in once you've had a moment. Claire nodded, wiping her eyes. As she stepped toward the door, Max made another small sound, this one somewhere between a whine and a sigh. His training held, but every line of his body spoke of desperate recognition and desire to move forward. Ava watched through the door's window as Claire approached her father's bed. James Cooper lay against the white hospital pillows, his military bearing visible even in illness. When Claire spoke to him, his eyes opened, and even from outside, Ava could see the immediate question in them, the hope and desperation that made her own eyes fill with tears. The moment had arrived, and suddenly Ava understood that she wasn't just witnessing a reunion, she was watching something sacred, something that transcended hospital policies and medical procedures. This was about loyalty, love, and a bond that even death couldn't completely sever. The door to James Cooper's room opened with a whisper of hydraulics, and Ava guided Max forward with Claire close behind. The moment they crossed the threshold, something extraordinary happened. The seasoned military dog, who had maintained perfect discipline throughout their journey, let out a soft whimper that seemed to come from deep in his soul. James Cooper's eyes found Max, and in that instant years seemed to fall away from his face. "Max!" he whispered, his voice stronger than it had been in days. "My boy." His weathered hand reached out, trembling not from weakness now, but from emotion. Max moved forward with deliberate steps, his training warring with his obvious desire to rush to his partner. His tail, which had remained still throughout their hospital journey, began to wag in slow, dignified sweeps. When he reached the bed, he pressed his nose into James's outstretched hand, and the sound he made was unlike anything Ava had ever heard. Part whine, part purr, pure love. "Permission to come up, soldier?" James asked, his military bearing surfacing through his illness. Max's ears pricked forward, recognizing the familiar command. He waited, perfectly still, until James patted the bed beside him. In one fluid motion, the aging dog carefully jumped up, mindful of the IV lines and monitoring equipment, and settled himself against James's side as if he'd never left. Ava noticed Dr. Richards watching from the doorway, his clinical detachment cracking as James buried his face in Max's fur. The veteran's shoulders shook with silent sobs, while Max pressed closer, offering the same comfort he'd surely provided during countless nights in Afghanistan and difficult days that followed. "He hasn't been eating," Claire said softly, watching. Her father and his dog reunite. Neither of them has, really. It's like they've been fading together. She wiped tears from her eyes. "Max used to sit by the front door for hours after we took him. Sometimes he'd sleep in Dad's old room, curled up with one of his shirts." Nancy appeared with a chair for Claire, her own eyes suspiciously bright as she watched the scene unfold. The morning sun streamed through the windows, catching the silver in Max's muzzle and James's hair, highlighting how time had aged them together. "Remember Kandahar, boy?" James's voice was stronger now, his hand stroking Max's fur with practiced familiarity. "That night you found the IED, saved the whole unit." Max's tail thumped against the bed in response, his eyes never leaving his partner's face. "Always had my back, didn't you? Best battle buddy a Marine could ask for." Ava checked the monitors out of habit, but what she saw surprised her. James's vital signs, which had been gradually declining over the past days, showed improvement. His oxygen saturation was up, his heart rate had stabilized, and even his blood pressure looked better. She caught Dr. Richards' eye, and she could tell he'd noticed too. They went through 3 tours together, Claire explained quietly to the medical staff. Max found explosives, protected their unit, helped Dad sleep when the mortars were falling. After they came home, he knew when Dad's PTSD was triggering before anyone else did. He'd lead him out of crowds, wake him from nightmares, keep him grounded. James had begun telling Max about his grandchildren, showing him pictures on Claire's phone. The dog studied each image with apparent interest, his tail wagging gently when James laughed at a particular memory. It was as if the sterile hospital room had transformed into sacred space where pain and separation no longer existed. Dr. Richards stepped fully into the room, his clipboard forgotten at his side. He watched as Max adjusted his position slightly, somehow knowing exactly how to lie without disturbing any of the medical equipment. The dog's military training was still evident in every movement, but it was tempered now by the deepest kind of love. "Attention to orders," James said softly, and Max's head lifted immediately, ears forward. Even now, even here, their bond as soldiers remained unbroken. "You've done your duty, soldier, above and beyond." His voice cracked. "Claire's going to take good care of you. That's your new mission, understand?" Max pressed his nose into James's hand again, and Ava had to turn away for a moment, overwhelmed by the depth of understanding that passed between man and dog. When she looked back, she saw that James had relaxed against his pillows, one hand buried in Max's fur, looking more peaceful than she'd seen him since his admission. The minutes ticked by, precious and fleeting, but in that room, time seemed to move differently. It was measured not in seconds or hours, but in gentle breaths, soft whimpers, and the steady rhythm of two hearts beating in sync, finding their way back to each other, one last time. As the hour neared its end, Ava noticed something remarkable happening in James's room. Other hospital staff had begun finding reasons to pass by, slowing their steps to witness the extraordinary scene within. The usual hurried pace of the medical floor had shifted, as if the entire ward was holding its breath, understanding they were witnessing something profound. Two nurses from the next shift arrived early, standing quietly with Nancy, as James told Max stories about their time together. "Remember that sandstorm?" he asked, his voice growing tired but his eyes still bright. "Couldn't see 2 feet in front of us, but you never lost your way. Led the whole unit back to base." Max's tail thumped steadily against the bed, his eyes never leaving James's face. Dr. Richards checked his watch, and Ava could see the internal struggle on his face. The official hour was nearly up, but the medical readings continued to show improvement. James's oxygen levels had stabilized, his heart rate was steady, and most surprisingly, he was more alert and engaged than he had been in days. "His body is responding to the interaction," Dr. Richards murmured to Ava, his voice low and thoughtful. "The emotional connection is having a measurable physical impact." He paused, watching as Max gently adjusted his position, somehow knowing exactly how to move without disturbing any of the medical equipment. "I've read studies about this, but seeing it..." A young orderly appeared with lunch trays for the floor, but instead of continuing his rounds, he stood transfixed in the doorway. James had begun sharing his hospital food with Max, breaking small pieces of turkey from his sandwich. The dog took each morsel with gentle military precision, his manners as impeccable as they must have been in the field. "First time he's eaten properly in days," Claire whispered, her eyes filled with tears. "Either of them." She watched as her father offered another piece to Max, his hands steadier than they had been all week. "It's like they're healing each other even now." Through the window, the midday sun cast warm squares of light across the hospital bed, illuminating man and dog in a gentle glow. Max's fur shimmered with hints of gold and silver, and James's face seemed younger somehow, the lines of pain softened by joy. The monitoring equipment beeped steadily in the background, its rhythm now a gentle accompaniment to their reunion rather than a reminder of illness. "Sir," Ava approached Dr. Richards carefully, "I know the hour is almost up, but his vitals..." She gestured to the monitors, where the improvement was clearly visible. "Maybe we could..." Before she could finish, an unexpected voice joined the conversation. "Let them be." Dr. Martinez, the hospital's senior physician, stood in the doorway. She must have heard about what was happening, though Ava hadn't seen her arrive. Sometimes, medicine isn't just about protocols. Dr. Richards straightened, prepared to defend his decision to allow the visit, but Dr. Martinez held up a hand. "I've reviewed the situation," she said, her voice carrying the weight of decades of medical experience. "And I'm authorizing an extension for therapeutic purposes." She smiled slightly at Dr. Richards. "We'll document it as an experimental treatment, study, if anyone asks." The tension in the room eased, and Ava noticed several staff members trying to hide their relief. James seemed unaware of the medical discussion, focused entirely on Max as he recounted another story from their service days. "You remember that night in the mountains?" he asked softly. "When everything was quiet except for your breathing next to me? Kept me sane, boy, kept me human." Max pressed closer, if that was possible, his body curled protectively around his partner. His vigilance never wavered, but there was a softness to it now, as if he understood this mission was different from their others. This wasn't about protection or detection. It was about comfort, about love, about saying goodbye. Claire had begun taking pictures with her phone, capturing these precious moments. "For the kids," she explained quietly to Ava, "so they'll remember how special their grandpa was, how much Max loved him." She paused, watching as her father drifted into a peaceful sleep, his hand still buried in Max's fur. How some bonds go deeper than words can explain. The afternoon light had begun to fade, casting long shadows across the room, but nobody mentioned the passing time. Max remained alert but peaceful, his presence seeming to fill the room with a kind of grace that made even the beeping monitors sound gentler. It was as if the whole hospital had entered a different dimension, one where healing was measured not in numbers and charts, but in moments of connection and understanding. The night shift at Oakwood Veterans Hospital arrived with a quiet anticipation that felt different from other evenings. Ava Mitchell stood at the nurses' station, her shift transitioning into something far more extraordinary than she could have imagined that morning. Max still lay beside James Cooper, the connection between them defying every medical expectation. Dr. Martinez had authorized an extended therapeutic intervention, a decision that was slowly reshaping conversations throughout the hospital. The administrator, who had initially been skeptical, now moved through the corridors with a newfound softness in his professional demeanor. Whispers of James and Max's reunion had spread like a gentle current, touching everyone from the youngest residents to the most seasoned nurses. In room 412, the evening light filtered through partially drawn blinds, casting long shadows across James's bed. Max remained vigilant, his military training evident in the way he positioned himself, close enough to provide comfort, yet carefully avoiding any medical equipment. Claire had fallen asleep in a chair near the window, her hand resting near her father's bed, a testament to the emotional exhaustion of their journey. "He hasn't slept this peacefully in months," Claire had told Ava earlier, her voice thick with emotion. "Not since before the diagnosis," and it was true. James's breathing had become more regular. The lines of pain that typically etched his face smoothed out in a way that spoke of something beyond medical intervention. Dr. Richards made his evening rounds, his clipboard tucked under his arm, moving, with a deliberation that suggested he was processing something profound. He paused at James's door, watching the scene with a complexity of emotion that defied his usual clinical detachment. The monitoring equipment showed stable readings, better than stable, actually. James's vital signs suggested a resilience that contradicted his terminal diagnosis. Nancy, the charge nurse, who had initially been skeptical of Ava's plan, now moved through the ward with a quiet pride. She'd seen countless medical miracles in her decades of nursing, but this felt different. This was about something more fundamental, a connection that transcended medical understanding. As the night deepened, James began to dream. His hand, which rested on Max's fur, twitched slightly, fingers moving as if reliving moments from their shared past. Max remained absolutely still, his ears occasionally pricking forward at some sound only he could detect, offering a protective presence that went beyond simple companionship. The young resident, who had earlier spoken about her brother's service, now stood just outside the door, her tablet forgotten in her hand. She was documenting everything, not just the medical data, but the nuanced interactions between James and Max. Something groundbreaking was happening, and she knew it. A soft conversation began to emerge among the night staff. Dr. Martinez had already begun preliminary discussions about documenting this extraordinary therapeutic intervention. "It's more than just animal therapy," she had told Dr. Richards earlier. "It's a profound demonstration of healing that we don't yet understand." James murmured something in his sleep, a fragment of a military command, perhaps, or a memory from Afghanistan. Max's response was immediate and subtle, a slight repositioning, a gentle press against James's side that seemed to say, "I'm here. We're safe." The dog's entire being radiated a commitment that went beyond training, beyond duty. This was pure, unconditional love. Claire stirred in her chair, her hand reaching out to touch her father's arm. The connection between James, Max, and Claire created a triangle of support that seemed to generate its own healing energy. The hospital room, typically a place of clinical detachment, had transformed into something sacred, a space where love could be seen, almost touched. The night nurses moved with an unusual quietness, conscious of the delicate balance they were witnessing. Ava found herself checking James's monitors, not with clinical detachment, but with a sense of genuine hope. Each stable reading felt like a small victory, a testament to the power of connection. Dr. Richards, who had always prided himself on scientific precision, found himself wrestling with something beyond his medical training. He'd seen countless patients, documented countless cases, but this was different. The bond between James and Max challenged everything he thought he understood about healing, about the intricate connections between physical and emotional well-being. As midnight approached, the hospital settled into its nocturnal rhythm. But in room 412, a different kind of energy pulsed, quiet, profound, transformative. Max remained alert, yet peaceful, his body a living testament to years of military training and unconditional love. James slept more deeply than he had in months, his breathing steady, his body showing signs of unexpected resilience. The story of James and Max was becoming more than a personal reunion. It was becoming a narrative that would challenge medical protocols, spark conversations about therapeutic interventions, and remind everyone who heard it about the extraordinary bonds that can exist between humans and animals. And through it all, Max kept watch, a guardian, a companion, a living bridge between past and present, between war and healing, between a soldier's memories and a final profound moment of peace. The morning light crept slowly across room 412, casting a soft golden glow that seemed to transform the sterile hospital environment into something more intimate, more sacred. James Cooper's room had become a focal point of unexpected medical wonder, with doctors and researchers quietly gathering outside, their professional curiosity piqued by the extraordinary events unfolding within. Dr. Martinez arrived early, her crisp white coat moving silently as she reviewed James's charts. The medical data told a story that defied conventional understanding. James's vitals had stabilized in a way that seemed impossible just days earlier. His oxygen levels, which had been critically low, now showed remarkable improvement. More astonishing was the subtle but significant change in his overall physiological markers. Inflammation markers reduced, cellular stress indicators diminished. Max remained constant, a living guardian whose presence seemed to radiate a healing energy that medical science struggled to quantify. Claire had brought a small photo album from home, and now she sat quietly, showing her father pictures of her children, of family gatherings, of moments Max had been part of. The dog's ears would perk up at certain names, his tail giving a gentle thump of recognition. "Remember when Sophie learned to ride her bike?" Claire asked, pointing to a photograph. James's hand, which had been trembling previously, now moved with surprising steadiness as he traced the image. Max shifted slightly, pressing closer to James's side, his presence a constant source of comfort and stability. The hospital administrator, Michael Reyes, arrived with a team of researchers from the local university's medical school. They moved with a carefully controlled excitement, clipboards in hand, multiple devices ready to capture every nuance of the interaction between James and Max. This was more than a medical observation. It was potentially groundbreaking research into the therapeutic power of service animal connections. "We're seeing something unprecedented," Dr. Martinez was explaining to Reyes, her voice low but intense. "The emotional and physiological response is completely outside our typical understanding of terminal patient care." She gestured toward James, who was now slowly eating breakfast, something he hadn't done consistently in weeks. "Look at his muscle tone, his engagement. It's as if the presence of the dog has activated some fundamental healing mechanism." Ava Mitchell stood nearby, her professional demeanor a careful mask over the deep emotion she felt. She had been the catalyst for this extraordinary moment, the nurse who refused to accept that a dying veteran should be denied his final wish. Now, she watched as medical professionals began to see what she had intuitively understood, that healing was about more than just clinical interventions. The research team began their systematic documentation. They took blood samples, monitored brain activity, recorded Max's interactions with James. Each movement, each moment of connection became a data point in what might become a revolutionary study about the healing power of animal-human bonds, particularly for veterans dealing with trauma and terminal illness. "In Afghanistan," James suddenly said, his voice clearer than it had been in months, "Max saved more lives than any medal could represent." He was looking at the researchers, but his hand never left Max's fur. The dog remained perfectly still, alert yet relaxed, understanding his role as both companion and protector. Dr. Richards, who had been skeptical just days earlier, now moved with a sense of wonder. He reviewed the preliminary data, his medical training wrestling with the inexplicable improvements they were witnessing. James's body was responding in ways that contradicted every previous medical assessment. The cancer markers that had been steadily increasing were showing signs of stabilization, not regression, but a remarkable holding pattern. Claire shared stories about Max's history, how he had helped James through years of PTSD, how the dog could sense panic attacks before they fully manifested, how he had been more than a service animal, but a literal lifeline for a veteran struggling to readjust to civilian life. The researchers listened intently, understanding that they were capturing more than medical data. They were documenting a profound human story. A young medical student approached Ava during a break. "How did you know?" she asked quietly. "How did you know this was possible?" Ava simply smiled, her eyes never leaving James and Max. "Some things," she said, "are about more than medical charts. Some things are about connection." The university team began discussing the potential implications of their observations. This wasn't just about animal therapy. This was about understanding the complex interplay between emotional states, physiological responses, and the mysterious bonds that can exist between humans and animals. Max represented more than a service dog. He was a living testament to a form of healing that transcended traditional medical understanding. As the morning progressed, news of the extraordinary reunion began to spread beyond the hospital walls. A local reporter arrived, hoping to capture the story. Veteran support groups reached out, sensing that something profound was happening in room 412, a narrative of hope, of connection, of the unbreakable bonds forged in service. James looked more alive than he had in months. His eyes, which had been dulled by illness and pain, now carried a spark of the Marine he had once been. Max remained his constant companion, a living bridge between past and present, between war and healing, between a soldier's memories and an unexpected moment of profound peace. The room continued to pulse with an energy that defied medical explanation, a testament to the extraordinary power of love, loyalty, and connection. The afternoon sunlight filtered through the hospital window, casting long shadows across room 412 that seemed to hold the weight of untold stories. James Cooper's condition continued to defy medical expectations, with Max maintaining his vigilant presence beside him. The room had become more than a medical space. It was a sanctuary of healing that challenged everything the medical staff thought they understood about terminal care. Dr. Martinez called a comprehensive review meeting in the hospital's conference room, bringing together specialists from multiple disciplines. The walls were lined with charts, medical imaging, and preliminary data gathered from James and Max's extraordinary interaction. Researchers from the university's medical school sat alongside veteran healthcare specialists, their clipboards filled with notes that seemed to tell a story far more complex than simple medical observations. "We're looking at something unprecedented," Dr. Martinez began, her voice carrying the weight of decades of medical experience. She clicked a remote, bringing up detailed scans of James's cellular markers. The inflammatory responses, the neural activity. It's as if the presence of the service dog has triggered a fundamental recalibration of the patient's physiological systems. Dr. Richards, who had been the most skeptical initially, now leaned forward with genuine scientific curiosity. "The most remarkable aspect," he interjected, "is the sustained nature of these changes. We're not talking about a temporary spike in well-being, but a consistent improvement that defies our current understanding of terminal illness progression." The room fell silent as a video played, James and Max during their reunion, captured by discreet medical cameras. The bond between man and dog was palpable, a living testament to years of shared experience, trauma, and healing. Claire Cooper had provided additional context, sharing detailed medical records and personal history that painted a comprehensive picture of their relationship. A veteran liaison officer from the VA had joined the meeting, bringing with her years of experience working with service members dealing with PTSD and long-term health challenges. "What we're seeing here," she explained, pointing to specific moments in the video, "is more than just a medical miracle. This is about the deep psychological connection that develops between service members and their support animals." Ava Mitchell stood at the back of the room, her professional demeanor masking the deep emotional investment she felt. She had been the catalyst for this moment, the nurse who had refused to accept a bureaucratic denial of James's final wish. Now, she watched as medical professionals began to unravel the complex tapestry of healing that Max represented. The research team had collected an extraordinary amount of data. Max's interactions with James showed a level of intuitive understanding that went beyond typical service dog training. Brain scan comparisons revealed something even more remarkable: synchronized neural responses between James and Max, suggesting a connection that transcended traditional understanding of human-animal interactions. "We've documented similar phenomena in limited studies," one of the university researchers explained, "but never with this level of detail and sustained impact." The dog's presence seems to be activating healing mechanisms we didn't even know existed. He clicked through a series of slides showing complex neural imaging, highlighting areas of unexpected activity. Outside the conference room, the hospital continued its daily rhythm, unaware of the potentially groundbreaking discussion taking place. Nurses moved through corridors, patients received treatment, but in this room, something extraordinary was unfolding. A potential revolution in understanding healing, trauma, and the profound connections that can exist between humans and animals. Claire Cooper had been invited to share her perspective, providing insights into James and Max's shared history. She spoke about the years after James's return from Afghanistan, the struggles with PTSD, the nights Max would wake him from nightmares, the way the dog had been more than a service animal. He had been a lifeline. There were times, Claire recalled, her voice soft but steady, when Max was the only thing keeping my father connected to the world. After his unit lost Thompson during that patrol in Kandahar, my father shut down completely. Max was the one who brought him back, who helped him rebuild his life piece by piece. The veteran liaison officer nodded, understanding the depth of what Claire was describing. Service dogs are more than just trained animals, she explained to the group. They're living support systems. They read emotional states, anticipate needs, provide a constant source of stability for veterans dealing with complex trauma. Dr. Martinez began discussing the potential broader implications of their findings. This isn't just about one veteran and his dog, she emphasized. We're looking at a potentially transformative approach to understanding healing, particularly for veterans dealing with complex physical and psychological challenges. The university researchers were already discussing potential follow-up studies, grant proposals, ways to further investigate the extraordinary connection they were witnessing. Max represented more than a medical case study. He was a living testament to the profound healing potential of unconditional love and connection. A series of medical charts told a story of transformation. James's cancer markers, which had been steadily increasing, showed signs of stabilization. His cellular stress indicators had dramatically reduced. More importantly, his overall quality of life had improved in ways that defied medical explanation. "We need to be cautious about overstating our findings," Dr. Richards interjected, his scientific training tempering the excitement in the room. "But there's no denying something extraordinary is happening. The synchronized neural responses, the physiological improvements, this demands further investigation." Ava Mitchell caught the eye of the veteran liaison officer. A silent understanding passed between them. They had both witnessed something that went beyond medical charts and scientific observations. This was about human connection, about healing, that couldn't be fully quantified or explained. As the meeting continued, discussions expanded. How could they replicate these findings? What protocols could be developed to integrate similar therapeutic approaches for veterans? The room buzzed with potential, with the excitement of medical professionals who understood they might be witnessing something truly groundbreaking. Outside the conference room, in room 412, James Cooper slept peacefully. Max's protective presence, a constant reminder of the extraordinary journey they had shared, a journey that had brought them here, to this moment of unexpected healing, of profound connection that challenged everything they thought they understood about medicine, about trauma, about the mysterious ways healing can manifest. The following days transformed Oakwood Veterans Hospital into a nexus of medical curiosity and human compassion. James Cooper's room had become more than a patient's space. It was now a site of potentially groundbreaking medical research, drawing specialists from across the country who wanted to understand the extraordinary connection between James and Max. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a leading researcher in integrative medicine from Johns Hopkins, arrived with a team of specialists. Her reputation for challenging conventional medical boundaries preceded her, and she approached James's case with a blend of scientific rigor and genuine human curiosity. She spent hours reviewing the detailed medical records, watching video, documentation of James and Max's interactions, her keen eyes catching nuances that others might have missed. "It's not just about the dog's presence," she explained to Dr. Martinez during a detailed consultation. "We're seeing a complete physiological recalibration that suggests a much deeper mechanism of healing. The neural synchronization between James and Max is unlike anything in our current medical literature." The research team had set up sophisticated monitoring equipment in James's room. Specialized cameras captured every interaction, while advanced biosensors tracked minute changes in James's vital signs, neural activity, and cellular responses. Max moved with his characteristic military precision, seemingly aware of the scientific scrutiny, yet remaining focused on his primary mission: supporting James. Claire Cooper had become an integral part of the medical team's investigation. She provided extensive background information about her father's military service, his struggles with PTSD, and the decades-long relationship with Max. Old photographs, medical records, and personal journals painted a comprehensive picture of their shared journey. After his third tour, Claire explained during one interview, "My father was barely functioning. The nightmares, the anxiety, the constant hypervigilance. Max was the only thing that kept him connected to normal life." She showed researchers a series of photographs documenting their relationship. Max sitting protectively beside James during family gatherings, accompanying him to therapy sessions, providing a constant source of stability. Ava Mitchell found herself at the center of a growing narrative that extended far beyond her initial act of compassion. Medical students and researchers sought her perspective, wanting to understand the human element behind the extraordinary medical case. She remained humble, consistently redirecting attention to James and Max's remarkable bond. The VA began taking serious notice of the developing research. A delegation arrived, led by a team of veteran healthcare specialists and medical researchers. They were particularly interested in the potential implications for veteran treatment protocols, especially for those dealing with complex PTSD and terminal illnesses. "We're looking at a potential paradigm shift," Dr. Marcus Thompson, the VA's chief medical researcher, told a group of journalists. "This isn't just about animal therapy. This is about understanding the profound physiological and psychological connections that can support healing." James's medical improvements continued to defy explanation. His cancer markers showed unusual stability, and his overall physical condition seemed to be improving rather than deteriorating. The medical team ran extensive tests, cross-referencing data, seeking to understand the mechanisms behind these unexpected changes. Max remained a constant, his presence both protective and therapeutic. The dog seemed to understand the medical environment with an almost supernatural intuition. He would adjust his position to avoid medical equipment, remain perfectly still during examinations, yet remained constantly attuned to James's emotional and physical state. The hospital administration saw an opportunity to position themselves at the forefront of innovative medical research. Michael Reyes, the hospital administrator, began discussions about establishing a specialized research center focused on integrative healing approaches, with a particular emphasis on veteran care. Researchers from multiple disciplines began converging on Oakwood. Neurologists, veterinary specialists, psychologists, and trauma experts all wanted to understand the extraordinary connection between James and Max. They brought with them advanced diagnostic tools, years of specialized research, and a genuine sense of wonder. Dr. Rodriguez's team developed a comprehensive research protocol. They were mapping neural responses, tracking cellular changes, documenting every subtle interaction between James and Max. Blood tests, brain scans, and continuous monitoring provided a wealth of data that challenged existing medical understanding. We're seeing evidence of what some researchers have theorized, but never conclusively documented, Dr. Rodriguez explained during a press conference. A form of interspecies neural synchronization that suggests healing can occur through profound emotional connections. The media began picking up the story. Local news channels ran segments about James and Max, and national networks showed growing interest. Veterans support groups reached out, seeing the potential for a revolutionary approach to veteran care and trauma treatment. Claire found herself at the center of multiple interviews, sharing the deeply personal story of her father's journey. With Max, she spoke about the years of struggle, the moments of darkness, and the extraordinary healing that had occurred in these unexpected final days. Hospital staff watched in awe as James, who had been expected to decline rapidly, showed signs of unexpected vitality. He spoke more, ate more, and seemed more engaged with the world around him. Max remained his constant companion, a living bridge between past trauma and present healing. The research team continued to collect data, each day revealing new insights into the extraordinary connection between James and Max. They were documenting something that went beyond traditional medical understanding, a profound demonstration of healing that challenged everything they thought they knew about human and animal connections. As the sun set on another remarkable day at Oakwood Veterans Hospital, Room 412 remained a beacon of hope, a testament to the extraordinary power of love, loyalty, and the mysterious ways healing can manifest. As the days passed, James Cooper's condition remained a medical marvel. Max never left his side, a steadfast guardian witnessing the gradual transformation. On a quiet Sunday morning, surrounded by Claire, Ava Mitchell, and the medical team that had become his extended family, James took his final breaths, but not in the way anyone had expected. His passing was peaceful, with Max pressed close, their connection unbroken until the very end. The medical world would continue to study their extraordinary bond, but those in the room knew they had witnessed something beyond scientific explanation, a pure, unbreakable connection of love and loyalty. Research, based on James and Max's remarkable journey, began to transform veteran care nationwide. Hospitals implemented new protocols for animal-assisted therapy, recognizing the profound healing potential of the human-animal connection. Claire continued her father's legacy, speaking at veterans events, sharing their story of hope and resilience. Max, though older and graying, continued to live with Claire's family, a living testament to the extraordinary bond between a soldier and his most faithful companion. Want to hear more incredible true stories of hope, healing, and human connection? Subscribe now to Extraordinary Moments podcast, where real life proves more miraculous than fiction. New episodes drop every week, bringing you stories that will touch your heart, challenge your understanding, and remind you of the incredible power of love. Subscribe today and never miss a moment of inspiration.